Welcome. We're going to get started. We've still got people arriving, but this is such an important program and we need to get started. So welcome to the second program that our chapter is putting on in 2021. It's great to have you all here today to stay connected with NACD and with our education programs. Today's program is on the hospitality and travel industry, and it's difficult to think of many industries that have been more affected in terms of operations and employment than the hospitality and travel industry. By the way, my name is Richard Munro. I'm Programs Chair for those that don't know me. We conceived this series on the major industries which make up our economy to learn from directors and experts about the challenges and opportunities in those industries that we can learn and take back to the boards that we serve on in other industries as well. So welcome this morning. Next, I would like to welcome our newest NACD members who are in attendance today. Welcome to Maura, Jesse and Darcy. Welcome to our chapter, welcome to NACD, and if you have any questions at all about how to become involved, please just reach out to Anne Etley, our Executive Director, and she'll be happy to give you the information that you need. So welcome today. Next, I would like to welcome and thank our chapter sponsors who make these programs possible. You can see our sponsor partners on your screen at the moment. We're extremely appreciative of all of our sponsor partners and their support, especially over the past year. Everyone attending this program will be muted to maintain audio quality. And if you have a question, and we encourage you to ask questions, this is not a shy audience normally, please put your question in the chat box and I'll monitor that, and at an appropriate break, I'll refer those questions to the panel. We hope that everyone will keep their camera on today to create a more engaged experience. It's great to see everyone's faces in this virtual world. I'd like to also let you know that we're recording today's program and we'll be producing a written summary of today's content to distribute to our members, and our panelists have also agreed that we can post this video online for NACD members as well. If your schedule allows, we'll be keeping this meeting open after the program, so from about 9 o'clock to about 9:30 for casual networking. So we'll break into smaller groups, and we hope that you'll take advantage of this additional time to mingle with your peers. Now onto the program. You've all received a copy of the bios of our speakers and of our moderator yesterday, so we're not going to spend time reviewing those. Instead, I would now like to introduce our moderator for this session, Rose McKinney-James, who's also on our chapter board, so that we can dive right into the program. Over to you, Rose. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone. I'll add my welcome. And we certainly appreciate you making time to join us amidst what is an ongoing and a set of unprecedented challenges for directors. I think we are very fortunate to have two esteemed directors with us this morning, one a CEO, the other a lead director. And of course, amongst you within the audience, we have directors and industry leaders, and I believe like most, you're anxious to benefit from these perspectives. So we're all interested in having a little peek behind the curtain, if you will, around what's happening in this industry. And it's been well documented, and I think Richard mentioned that we are focused on what was 2020, which brought us intense disruption and attention to the hospitality and travel industries. And the news has been full of stories. And acknowledging that the pandemic has absolutely wreaked havoc on the travel and hospitality industry, the leadership of the U.S. Travel Association indicated that travel supported 1 in 10 jobs prior to the pandemic, powering the economy and providing jobs in urban and rural communities alike. And it's well within reach to return America to the record growth that travel industry experienced prior to the pandemic. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that. So suddenly now we're all using the terms PPE, Zoom, N45, all of these terms are now ubiquitous. And reflecting on these highly charged dynamics, I hope we can use our time today to explore how boards and directors frame opportunity, alignment, and a vision for the future. So it's my pleasure to welcome Patricia Bedient and Bill Hornbuckle. And I'd like to start just by asking you both, I guess I want to do a little bit of a check-in just to see how you are doing, because leaders are faced with some unprecedented challenges. And also, we're going to go into more conversation around your employees, but maybe you can just give me some framing about how you're feeling today as we begin this discussion. Patty, you want to start?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Rose, and the Pacific Southwest chapter for the opportunity to join you all today. And I'd also like to thank those of you that have been Alaska Flyers or may have been guests at Park Hotels and Resorts Properties. But to your question, I really couldn't be more proud of the Alaska and Park employees and board members for pulling together to take care of, first of all, each other, as well as our many stakeholders, including guests, communities, and shareholders. And given their efforts, and because of their efforts, and even though, as you said, Rose, it certainly has been a challenge, I do believe that we'll come out of this pandemic with opportunities that will make us even stronger organizations in the future. So as we sit here today, I'm, I guess, realistic where we are, but optimistic about the future.
Outstanding. Bill?
Rose, let me just thank you and Richard and the organization for having the opportunity to speak on behalf of the company this morning. I will echo several of Patty's comments, but maybe just on a personal note, a couple things. You know, many of us, I'm sure, have had this impact, not only our employment, our employees, and our homes and our families, as have I. You know, I had my daughter and my son-in-law with 2 new babies recently come down with COVID, and that's a scare. I had a very close personal friend end up in emergency and ICU. And like most places in the country, trying to get somebody even into ICU is a challenge, given what's, you know, hospitals are stressed. And so I know we've all felt it personally, as have I. For me, I know, Rose, you know this, but for the broader audience, I'm a new CEO. I know the industry well. I've been in the company over 20 odd years, but I took the helm, if you will, as CEO, literally in the 2-week period between we were open and we were closed. And so it has been a journey, one that I could not have done without the extensive support of all of our board. And so Rose, and I know a couple of other board members are on here, thank you for that. But it's been a challenge. You know, as it relates to our employees, I know we'll get into this a little later, but we started in February with 82,000 employees. By the end of March, we were down to 12,000 employees. And so what they have gone through, what the community has gone through, particularly here in Las Vegas, but you know, we had a little early preview to this. We have a place in Macau, China. And so while I heard of it, I saw what it was doing there. Nobody imagined what ultimately it would do to this industry, to America, and to our families, and ultimately us as individuals. It is in some cases life-changing, and in some cases for sure an awakening about how to think about the future.
So speaking of awakenings and challenges, like many people, those early inklings created a little nervousness, but we were continuing to go about our business. So Patty, I very nervously boarded a flight to Naples, Florida. And on my return home, I think I arrived on March the 10th. I haven't flown since. Sorry. But I am still have that nervousness associated with it, and I'm of a certain age that makes me a little concerned about it. But I mean, I think few of us knew the magnitude of what was happening in March. And how does a board faced with such a dramatic, almost overnight decline in passengers approach the question of liquidity? Because that's clearly a significant part of our responsibility. Maybe you can help us understand how your board approached that.
Sure. Well, Rose, we do hope to get you back on a plane sometime soon. We'll talk about some safety a little bit later, maybe today. But I would start by saying that never has the necessity of having a strong balance sheet been more important than when we went into this pandemic. As you know, there wasn't much information early on but demand just fell away from what started the year to be just really an outstanding year for us. And there was just a lot of unknowns. But as this did happen, our first priority was to make sure that our employees and guests were safe. But we quickly pivoted to that question of liquidity. And while we didn't know what the timing or the depth of the demand destruction was going to be, we made the decision to act quickly and to go big in our efforts. Many of you have probably heard that old adage in business, and as a former CFO, this was certainly true in my career, that liquidity is like air. You never want to run out of it. So that was really the focus. There were two primary efforts. One was to get the cash burn down as quickly as possible, and then to go and secure additional financing. We renegotiated vendor contracts and terms, we lowered CapEx, we instituted voluntary leave programs, and we also appointed the corporate controller as the cash czar. So every week he decided what bills were going to be paid and how much they were going to be paid by. The board began meeting quickly with management at the beginning to discuss securing those additional forms of financing. And as many of you know, the government did eventually come through with some aid for the aviation industry, but it did come with a lot of strings and restrictions attached. So it was really important to understand what those limitations were and how they might affect the business longer term. We accessed a lot of different forms of financing, including bank financing and financing secured by equipment, primarily aircraft. We discussed issuing equity. We had very robust discussions about that, as you might imagine, because many of our competitors were issuing either straight equity or using convertibles. But given the low stock price, we were really hesitant to go that route. And ultimately, it was a good decision for us not to issue equity, as the stock has recovered significantly since that time, although certainly not to pre-COVID levels. But as we sit here today, although the future is still somewhat uncertain, we do believe that we have more than adequate liquidity now to see us through the pandemic and to emerge from a position of strength.
Bill, I'd like you to comment on the liquidity issue, but I also want you to help the audience understand, MGM, as you mentioned, faced the enviable task of responding to a statewide shutdown, and it required immediate action up to and including liquidity considerations and the steps that were necessary to address the workforce. But maybe you can walk us through, as a new CEO, some of the difficult decision-making and actions that were required to even comply with that shutdown.
Sure. Let me start with for us, maybe a little simpler, the liquidity issue. As I know, Rose, our company formed a REIT and had an asset-light strategy that went back all the way to 2017. And so by the time March hit of this year, on a recent sale of property, both in terms of Bellagio, Mandalay, and MGM, we'd amassed a little over $5 billion. And so we were in a very good liquid position in terms of cash. Now, none of us realized at the time how long this would last. I thought, maybe 90 days, 100 days. I think we all did when this first hit. But the good news is for us is our liquidity still remains strong, thankfully. We didn't have to do many of the things other companies have to do, at least at our scale. And so we still sit in a very good position, and we feel good about not only here, but our other entities. We have a publicly traded entity in Hong Kong as well, the Macau entity, that's in good condition. And so we absolutely think and know we're going to live out through this storm. And actually, on the other side of it, think of it in affirmative in terms of what opportunities exist for this company going forward, given our liquid position. As it relates to what we had to go through, it was the velocity of what happened and the speed of what had happened. Again, Rose, I can remember thinking about Macau and understanding it, but not conceptualizing it here. A couple things happened here. You may remember these. When the NBA went out, there was like this cultural thing that happened in the country that was like, uh-oh, something, this is bigger than we think. And there was something about that moment that twisted people's psyche. We went here quickly from, Las Vegas is extremely fortunate. It runs in the 90 percentile occupancies. Most of our regional casinos have small hotels. They're regionally based. And so tourism in the broader context is not in play. But we went from 90s down to 60s, down to 30% within a week. And we could immediately see fallout. For us, we thrive on large corporate business. We do a lot of tech sector business. And we got a call one Monday morning from Google that said they were pulling out in a massive way. They had a large scale group that was being planned for like the next 45 days. And then that sent another spiral through the tech sector that we lost the majority of our group business, at least for the perceivable near future, in about a week. And so we quickly realized something was needed to be done in terms of putting safety protocols in play, in terms of working with other colleagues in the industry, in terms of working with the state. And I think you know this, but in Nevada, particularly Southern Nevada, tourism is the industry. The industry employs about 250,000 people. We impact maybe, I don't know, a third of the valley's lives directly or indirectly in one way, shape, or form or another. MGM has the dubious responsibility of being the community's largest employer and taxpayer in the state. And so we were quickly in contact with the governor's office, talking about what to be done, what could be done, what restrictions to be put in play. But it quickly went from a conversation of what restrictions, what protocols in terms of health and safety, to we're going to have to close. And so I think, Rose, you'll recall one Sunday afternoon, we had a board call at about 1 o'clock. By 3 o'clock, we had made a decision to close. We'd called the governor's office, and by 6 o'clock that evening, he was on the news closing down the industry. And so we went from within a week and a half, operating at full scale down to nothing, literally. And it quickly followed suit in other jurisdictions. We have 8 regional properties sprinkled throughout the country, and we ended up in the same place, all in a matter of about 10 days. The impacts are going to linger. We have a view into hospitality, not only through our own lens, but we own a small management company that manages some bespoke hotels, Nomad and some others in New York and LA and places of that ilk. We have a small hotel company that we manage in mainland China with the Diatai State Guest House. And all of them were severely impacted. And that will be the lingering. I don't think it's going to be necessarily the bigger groups. I think they will survive, although the Hiltons of the world and Marriott that have a ton of franchisees will have independent challenges. But for us, small operatives, how they come back on their feet, how the governments help them, how ultimately we can help them sustain and come back to life will be critical. We own and operate about 450 restaurants, but about 20% of them are leased or managed, most notably, but leased by others. They're in trouble. Our ability to get behind that sector, to support it, to bring it back to life will be critical. And I think that's going to be the lingering impact. And then obviously, and most notably, the employees themselves. This has given, and the length of this has given people cause for rethinking everything from their livelihood to their lives to where they even want to reside. And so we've seen a shift in our workplace, people doing other things. We've helped them do other things. And the construct of how we've looked at making sure people are safe, making sure people have, most notably, and something we have funded from day one, health benefits in the middle of a health pandemic and a crisis. We thought that was essential, and we believe it to continue to be essential. And so, look, we've worked extensively, whether it was our union partners here in Southern Nevada, getting a shutdown. And one of the other key things we had and we accomplished early on was, and it was good for this state, I think, in its longevity, we were able to get, because of the strength of our industry, the strength of our union partners, a liability waiver. And so unless we do something absolutely ridiculously silly, we are not liable for COVID incidences. And so it's meaningful in the context of staying open, operating in an environment that is not only safe, but we ultimately believe we'll have an opportunity to come back and help some of our smaller partners survive. So, it's been complex, at the very least, Rose.
There's no question. Well, so that has me leaning into a critical aspect of our role as directors, which is just overall strategy when you're faced with the circumstances that Bill describes, Patty, your industry similarly. It forces the board to revisit strategy, to think about, as an example, the impact on the nature of our business, conferences and the like. Maybe you can offer some insights around how you and your board thought through adjustments to strategy.
Yeah, and I would just echo some of what Bill said in terms of having to shut down. Park Hotels owns 60 properties that are focused primarily on the resorts and luxury market. And we have 2 iconic properties, for example, in Hawaii. And shutting those down quickly was really a decision that needed to be made quickly, but there's a lot of human casualties that come with all of that, not just the employee base, but the ramifications to the rest of the industry as well. But as it relates to strategy, and especially at Alaska, going into the pandemic, as I said, we were really set to grow. So we were looking forward to 2020. Everybody thought it was going to be a great year. We had just finished a strategic planning exercise, looking out at the next 3 to 5 years. But given the pandemic and the significant demand destruction, it was pretty evident early on that most airlines were going to shrink, at least in the short term. But management was determined to find opportunities in the downturn to really position us again for growth coming out of the pandemic. So we had to very much deal from a strategic standpoint with all the shorter term challenges, one of which was not knowing how long this pandemic was going to last. But really look at opportunities that would allow us to grow again. And one opportunity that we had been focusing on was that we needed to solidify our fleet plan over the next few years. A few years ago, some of you may remember that Alaska acquired Virgin America. And along with that acquisition came a very different equipment type manufactured by Airbus. So prior to that acquisition, we had been an all Boeing fleet for our mainline flying. And there's a lot of complexity that comes with, and cost that comes with operating 2 different fleet types. You have to have pilot training. You can't just interchange flight crews between equipment. Maintenance and parts are all different. And so we were looking at whether or not we would maintain those 2 fleet types, or we would go back to either an all Airbus or all Boeing. And this downturn actually gave us the opportunity, working with Boeing, to reach a very attractive deal, both for us and for Boeing, that gave us the opportunity to divest of our Airbus A319s and 320s over the next couple of years, and also get additional growth airplanes further out at very attractive and very flexible terms. The aircraft that will be coming are much more fuel efficient, which is good for cost, but also in lowering our carbon footprint, which is becoming more and more important to all of us and all of our stakeholder base. I think one other thing that happened during this pandemic was that Alaska is primarily a domestic carrier. So we don't fly many international routes, some to Canada, some to Mexico. But we had been looking at a way to broaden our access for our flyers to an international network, to utilize certainly that network, but to also utilize Alaska Miles on that network to access international lounges. And so we had the opportunity to enter into the One World Alliance. And I think that people were much more willing to entertain those kinds of things because of the downturn and the need for additional access. So we entered into the One World Alliance, which will happen March 31st. We also entered into a West Coast Alliance with American Airlines to allow Alaska flyers to utilize their miles on American and also have reciprocity in terms of our elite flying status. So that gave us this access to a broader network. Now, international flying is not a big deal right now, but I do believe that longer term it will be in our future. So we were really focused on coming out of this in looking at opportunities to take advantage of the downturn from a strategic standpoint. And I must say that it was also, I guess, with all of the awful things that were happening in the pandemic, it was liberating to sort of look to the future and try to find some bright spots out there. So those are a couple of things that we did.
That is very hopeful. Bill, I would really like for you to share with the audience how you navigated through some opportunity relative to innovations and maybe some technology opportunity that you took advantage of, things that we deployed in the midst of what Patty describes as maybe, looking forward.
Sure, Rose. So look, Las Vegas of note, one thing I think we do well is scale. And particularly when you deliver it in a 5-star establishment like Bellagio, it's a tight balance to be able to do that. We were looking at and have been looking at for several years a whole bunch of technology ideas, and it's interesting what happens in a crisis. The simple idea was, can we get you checked in on a mobile device? Because irrespective of Bellagio and 5 stars, on a Friday afternoon when you check into a hotel, you could stand in line with 200 other folks, and it's just not a liberating experience. There's just no way around it. And so we were pushed quickly into what could we do from a public health perspective, from a social distancing context, and ultimately a technology platform to make it a better, safer environment with less contact was at the essence of it. We literally in a couple of months were able to put in mobile check-in on your cell phone. And so now you could check in literally from your home, from the airport as you arrived. You could use it as your room key. So you never had to literally see a physical person. And so it was a big uptick for us, and something that because of the crisis and the pandemic, we pushed through hard and quick on, and we got accomplished. If you think about now what we've been able to do, and I would tell you today, 40% of our folks now check in via that device. If you think about what that now means to our company, though, is now I have your data. I have you on your cell phone. I have you in our building. I know you're here, and I'm able to communicate with you. And so the horizons it opens up from a marketing platform for the longer term are pretty incredible. The other things that we did, we now have, like most restaurants, but we started this at scale. You now scan your menu, so it's all digital. There are no more paper products. You're not touching anything. Again, we took the same idea of making sure people didn't queue next to each other. So you now, instead of waiting for a restaurant or waiting to go into well, we don't have buffets, but waiting to go into something, you now queue up again on your mobile phone. And so we've taken, what technology was, we've quickly put it into play in a meaningful and large scale way. And it's connecting us more to the customers because we can now do preferences. We now understand because we can follow and track some of their behavior, not all of their behavior yet, but it really sets up a great platform for the future. And so, technology has played a significant role, and that's one of the things that won't go away. When you talk about what are the lasting benefits, and there are not a lot of them to this pandemic, it happens to be technology, its platforms, it's what it has taught us about how to go forward is something that's going to be lasting. And then, what the pandemic has taught us about what people really want and what it really matters to them is also interesting. Las Vegas is, as you know, as many of our places are, but particularly here, it's on steroids. This feast of things to do and see and come enjoy. At its very essence, people want to escape. They want to be here, in our case, most notably the game. And while entertainment and all of the periphery is relevant and very important in the long run, I think staying focused on our core product has been interesting to all of our businesses, and it's helped us reconnect with customers. It's kind of interesting in our world. Patty was talking about international travel. 75% of our revenue, our gaming revenue, not our total revenue, of our gaming revenue comes from under 5% of our customers, which, by the way, 70% of those customers come international. And so, as we've lost a large piece of that pie, if you will, our ability to focus on the ones that are here, and technology has helped us do that in a more meaningful way, I think is here to stay.
So you mentioned health and safety issues around social distancing and the like. Could you both maybe weigh in around some of the health and safety issues that you were forced to address, and more importantly, some of the innovations that perhaps you identified as a result of those efforts? Patty, you want to give it a shot?
Sure. So on the safety front, we've done a lot to improve safety at Alaska, certainly before the pandemic, but the pandemic brought it to a whole new level. We've actually implemented well over 100 layers of safety wrapped up in what we call our overall program called Next Level Care. And perhaps the most misunderstood area is in airflow on the aircraft. Now, many flyers tend to think of an aircraft as it's a closed environment with recirculated air, and none of us want to breathe somebody else's air. But nothing actually can be further from the truth. Our aircraft recirculates fresh air from the outside and through hospital-grade HEPA filters every 2 to 3 minutes. And these filters remove 99.9% of the airborne contaminants. So when the fresh air comes on board, it takes the most direct route to your seat. So it enters the cabin actually from the ceiling, and then it's pulled back out of the cabin through vents that are down by your feet. So this is important because the airflow goes from top to bottom rather than traveling the length of the aircraft. So those in the back are not breathing air from those in the front. In fact, the air you breathe only comes in contact with your immediate surroundings. So it's sort of keeping you in your own little travel bubble with new fresh air being circulated throughout the time that you're on the flight. There's been a lot of studies that have been done about this by Harvard and others to really focus on how safe the air really is on an airplane, safer than many of the spaces that you are in today, including some of your own homes. But other examples are probably more visible to travelers, such as sanitization of the plane, masking. Masks now are, as you know, 100% required. Contactless flying, using the Alaska Phone app to avoid hand-to-hand touch, whether that's buying something on the plane or whether it's paper boarding passes. All of that is now gone away. Many of the innovations that Bill was talking about in terms of contactless using technology have been put into place. We've also limited meal service on board. That's been changed again to limit the contact from flight attendants with our guests. We've also had a number of innovations around working with those locations that are have very strict travel locations. So for us, flying to Hawaii is a very important part of our business. So we worked with testing providers to enable our guests to obtain tests before flying to Hawaii. And therefore they can avoid quarantining once they arrive. Nobody wants to fly to Hawaii and then spend 2 weeks in a hotel. Nothing against hotels, of course, but spending 2 weeks in the hotel when you'd rather be out on the beach. So we also implemented some technology that allows them, rather than to go through that checking through once you land, to bypass some of that at the airport through some of the things that we did ahead of passengers getting on the flight. So those are just a few examples of the safety measures that have been put into place. Certainly social distancing, how planes are loaded, et cetera, have also been a part of that.
And Bill, you mentioned some of the specific efforts that MGM has undertaken around health and safety, but I'd like to pivot a little bit to your comment about your engagement with the state of Nevada, with the governor's office and local officials, and the ability of the company to lend its expertise to the public and to the community. Perhaps you could share with the audience a little more around how the company facilitated some of those activities.
Sure. Look, I think I mentioned it earlier. One thing we can do is things at mass and things in volume. And given the scale, when you have 82,000 employees, you have people with a lot of background, a lot of depth that you can call upon to do various things. And our business is far from single dimensional. We are in many different sectors. And so we come at it from a very unique perspective. We have a lot of resource. And so we have approached, and this is something as recently as yesterday, I sent a letter to the governor here of Nevada. We're going to do similar outreaches in the other states that we serve. If vaccines can be had in mass, and I believe here in Southern Nevada have convinced the governor and the government ultimately that frontline workers, casino workers, our industry is on the front line of our economy. And so once we get through the obvious first couple of tiers of people, healthcare workers, et cetera, that need to be taken care of, let us help administer at mass to our employees, because the sooner we can get shots in people's arms, the healthier this place will become and the quicker we will return to where we all want to be. And so we've had a lot of outreach in that context. We continue to have outreach with our exposure and our experience, some of the technology shares around how we reach folks who have been impacted or potentially in the immediate circle of somebody who's tested positive. We've learned a lot just simply because of the scale of what we do in terms of mass gatherings. We put a product in play called Convene with Confidence not long ago for the meetings market that enables us to get people tested within 20 minutes and walk around. Again, it was a partnership with United Health and Clear. On your phone, you can get basically a green badge that it says, I've been tested, and whatever protocol the meeting planner wants to set up, whether it's once coming in or daily doing it, or frankly, even more frequently. It's a 20-minute test. It gives you a green badge. It enables you to get in and out of meeting facilities or public gathering facilities. It's ripe right now for meetings market. It's not inexpensive. It's about $100 per. The question becomes, is it scalable so that over time, we can do things like concerts and entertainment and return to Las Vegas, the kinds of things that get people excited and keep them coming. And so, we've worked extensively again with the governor's offices here. Every jurisdiction is a little different. Obviously, everything's in the politics of those jurisdictions. We're in Mississippi and New York simultaneously. And I think you can all appreciate the politics are very different in each one of those locations. But our industry, because it is a lot of jobs, ultimately always gets attention. And so our ability to impact and be involved and offer up the kinds of things we can do, particularly here at scale, have been meaningful and well taken. Time to tell if we can get the vaccines we need quick enough. But it sounds like the cavalry is coming, but we'll hold our breath here.
I do hope, I think we all hope that the cavalry is indeed coming. As I said in my opening remarks, I want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to talk about the future and maybe to lean in on that hopeful note, and to give us your thinking about what recovery really looks like, where you see us going, and any comments that you have relative to guidance for our audience of directors. I'm told that we have a robust amount of activity going on in the chat. And so I want to be able to turn to the questions that are coming in from the audience. I can only see half of them on my screen, so I'm going to have to turn to you, Richard, for help walking through those logistics. But Patty, can you give me your thinking on the future? What is recovery going to look like? What can we look forward to?
Sure. One thing I would like to comment is just support for the community, which is really important. Bill mentioned the importance of being able to do things at scale. And one of the things that's really important in moving this vaccine out, and one of the things that people don't necessarily focus on, is in the state of Alaska, 80% of the communities there are only accessed by water or air. So Alaska, starting last month, was very instrumental in flying the first vaccines to Alaska, first for healthcare workers, but also for people in those communities, because obviously if COVID gets into those communities, being able to access healthcare in the form of hospitals, the only way you can get to a hospital is to fly out. So being able to support that effort has been really, really key. But as it relates to recovery, leisure travel will recover very differently than corporate travel or business travel. I would say there's just a lot of pent-up demand for leisure travel. People really want to get out. We're seeing significantly more bookings for future leisure travel than we're certainly seeing for current flying. But we need two things to further support that. One is widespread vaccine availability. So again, what we heard out of the White House yesterday in the form of accessing additional vaccine was really very, very hopeful. And then because of people getting vaccinated, cases coming down, states lifting travel restrictions is important. People are especially looking to go someplace warm with outdoor activities. They also want to visit people, especially family, that they haven't seen for a while. Human beings do want to be together. So I think we will see a lot of travel come back on the leisure side, especially domestic leisure, given some of the restrictions internationally, which may take longer to lift. Business travel, on the other hand, is going to take longer to recover. And given some of the acceptance of virtual meetings, I think it is an open question whether and how it will come back to levels before the pandemic hit. And I'd say really there's four things that need to happen for business travel to recover. One certainly is the widespread vaccinations, but companies need to be comfortable with the safety of their employees to be able to travel. Corporations and businesses need to be open to having visitors in their places of business. So not only do people want to be safe to travel to businesses, they also need businesses who want them to come. And then maybe lastly, for CFOs to open up their travel budgets again, because I think many CFOs have been enjoying the fact that the travel budget has certainly decreased in the period of COVID. But maybe the best way to provide some color is that at Alaska, we're planning our capacity levels. So this is the amount of flying we will be doing to be at about 80% by summer. And summer is typically a busy time. But that business travel will only be at about 50% of pre-COVID levels by the end of the year. Now, we do have capacity planned to be back at 100% if demand requires it by 2022, but we'll see what happens. But these are planning assumptions for capacity. That doesn't mean that the load factors or how full the planes will be at those same levels, but that's what we're looking at this point.
Outstanding. Bill, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I'm going to echo a lot of Patty's comments. Clearly, leisure will lead the way. A couple anecdotal things that you might find interesting. Having not paid enough attention to China the first time around, this time we are. It was interesting this summer, leading into this fall, when they began to recover. We have a small hotel, well, 700 rooms, not a small hotel in most standards, but a small hotel in China that serves basically as the Hawaii. It's a place called Sanya of China. It, within a month from complete restriction to opening, got back to 95% occupancy. And it ran that up until very recently when there's been a retrenchment there. In fact, for Chinese New Year's, the president has asked folks to stay close to home, which is not great for tourism or leisure. And they react to 100 cases in all of China is a big deal. And so it's a different mindset. But the point is that the resurgence of people once the destinations were opened was immediate. I will akin, I think, here in Las Vegas, something to the Roaring 20s. I do believe as this year recovers, we'll begin to see a great deal of volume come back. Think about where we are today. I look into our future bookings. More than any other time in recent history, people are booking further out, but they are looking to come. And so as we look at March, April, May, and June, as summer, back to Patty's comments, they want to be out by the pool, they want to be outside, they want to be in warm weather. It's not a surprise to anybody, but they're booking well in advance of what they've done historically as a percentage in greater volumes. Now, we're not back to the volumes that we'd like or hope. My broader view is it's going to take us all the way to 22 to get a full recovery. International will take a while, as I think we all understand and we all know. I don't disagree. The meetings market will take a while. One of our next big tests is we have something here, a citywide convention called World of Concrete in June. Now, these are robust concrete, builders. We will see how they do, but they are coming, come hell or high water. As long as the governor raises the ability to meet at scale, right now we're restricted to 50 and under, they will come and they've committed to it. And I think what the tell is that anybody who sells product has to get back out in front of their customer and has to be able to have that opportunity. Anybody who sits in the corporate world who doesn't necessarily need to do that. Like if I said, let's take 50 people on a retreat tomorrow, and let's go to a resort destination to talk about our business, I think we would hesitate on that. I understand that. But getting our salespeople back out on the road, getting us out in front of people, and in turn, the larger scale industries that come here, tech inclusive, that need to sell product, they need that personal contact. And so if we look at our year, we're down 70% this first quarter. I presume we'll be down 90% of our meetings market business. The second quarter is feeling a little bit like the same. By the end of the year, though, the second half of this year, the good news is we are over where we were in 2019. Now, if the pandemic doesn't cure, if the government doesn't lift restrictions, we're going to be back in the same boat. But I think the psychological point is people are still coming. Meeting planners and group planners still want to come, and they're holding onto their space because they know if they let it go, it'll be a challenge. The other side of the issue for us at meetings at Mass Leisure Travel is entertainment. We sell about 9 million tickets a year. We deal everything from large-scale concerts to small boutique shows. Interesting psyche. 82% of the deposits we took back before the pandemic, we are still holding for entertainment. People are coming back. They want to come back. They've not asked for their money back. If they have that prize ticket to Lady Gaga, they're coming. And so I think it's an interesting psychological point to focus on and to look to with some hope. But I think this will take a little longer than we want it to. I think the next quarter or so is going to be, less positive than we'd like it to be. But I think the momentum will build quickly through the summer, and hopefully, as we look at 2022, we can begin to get back to norm. But I think it will take all of 22 to recover our meetings business, our international business, and our leisure business at enough scale that we can drive up our yields.
Well, I think you've given us a framing for what is really, in a very rich way, what's happening in the travel and hospitality industry. I want to turn to the questions, and Richard, I'm going to turn to you, but I always do a quick room rater from my screen. And so Hoshi, I want to thank you for offering me the ocean. Karen, the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm hopeful now for some travel coming up. And you've given me some encouragement, Patty. I'm going to look for an opportunity to jump on a plane. So Richard, can you help us with the chat box?
Sure.
Oh, and so Room Raider says 10 for 10 for those that I've called out. All right, your turn.
What a fantastic discussion, and what a hopeful ending there, Bill and Patty. That's great. I don't think I've ever seen so many questions from the audience, so hopefully we can get through as many of these as possible. Here's one to start. Bill, maybe you can take this first. With the shift to mobile entry access, and given the increase in the cyber attack service, has that actually been an issue? And have you seen an uptick in incidents arising from the greater use of technology?
No, I mean, no, not on a personal level. Look, we still have a great deal of cyber attacks that go on daily. I mean, if I told you the number, it's staggering. But you know, we all have our defense. We all have our group. We all have we have a CISO and a team that goes at this every single day and looks for places and ways people can come in. But no, we're pretty secure. What we make sure is that if we bring on third-party vendors, because that's where we have had issues in the past, that they're completely vetted. And as much as we're in a hurry to get technology into people's hands, we have to do it obviously in that safe environment. So no, it hasn't ceased. It won't cease. But using the mobile device and an in-house app, it's our app. We've developed it in-house. It resides within our systems. The data resides within our systems. That's completely company owned and operated. We've had no challenges of specific tied to our expansion into mobile.
Patty, anything to add?
No, I would agree. Certainly cyber is a huge issue in all parts of the business, but it's not a new phenomena given the mobile app. It's unfortunately has been with us. It continues to increase just generally in cyber attacks. And I think it's going to be with us for a long time.
Okay, on to another question here. What kind of challenges do you see in ramping your employment back up as the virus recedes? Do you expect all of your employees to return, or are you worried about some of them drifting away to other employers? And what are you doing to prepare if this is a concern, or is it something you're not really worried about?
Maybe I'll go first. You know, no crisis should go without the opportunity. And so in our case, look, we've taken a really hardcore look at what we need to focus on as a business. We're multifaceted, so sometimes we get ourselves into places we probably shouldn't be or shouldn't have been historically. And so I think I mentioned earlier, we have 82,000 employees. I will suggest to you that between 10 and 15% of them will never come back, just because of how we've learned to operate in this. It's taught us a lot about what to do and frankly, what to stop doing. And so there are things that we won't do from an operating perspective, from an offering perspective, that weren't as relevant as we had hoped or thought. And it's been proven true through this pandemic. And so, you know, we'll come out of this hopefully a leaner, more efficient operation with some better margins. We've lost employees to the pandemic, literally physically. Unfortunately, we've lost them out of the communities because they've gone back either home to do other things. But no, I think people are anxious and desiring. And I guess the good news in a place like Southern Nevada is when the community shut down, the community shut down. It's not like there's a lot of other places to go in our environment. A little different in our regional properties. And so, yeah, there will be a changing of the guard and a changing of the workforce. We've realigned management. We've realigned some overhead structures. But I'm not in the long run worried about getting employees to come to do great work. It's kind of interesting. Our NPS scores have never been higher than they are today. And it tells me a lot of things. One of the things it tells me is people are just happy to be here, and employees are happy to be here. They're grateful for their opportunity, for their jobs. And yeah, they may not have the shifts they used to because they're working odd hours and whatnot, but they're happy about it, and they're pleased to be back at work. And so I think the environment going forward, it'll come quickly, but it won't come overnight. It won't come as quickly as the shutdown did. And so I think we're all going to be fine. At least we're going to be fine.
Yeah, and I would say that sitting here in Seattle, which is where Alaska is headquartered, even though lots of companies have struggled with demand and keeping employees employed because of that demand, we have the good fortune of being in the world of Microsoft and Amazon. Seattle has also been a place where Google and Facebook are putting big campuses with employees. So we have a lot of competition here for the employee base. So it's been as if the pandemic wasn't challenging enough. It's been even more challenging because as companies are shrinking, they are certainly growing. And I would say they probably have a bigger bag of money than many of us have to play with. But I think from an employee base, we put a lot of leaves in place. A lot of employees actually took advantage of some of those leaves to be able to take time off to deal with their own issues. So as we ramp back up, we're bringing many of them back. That many of them are really anxious to come back, but as Bill said, we will lose some of them, and that's okay. Overall, we have a pretty loyal employee base, and I think the best way of dealing with that is not what you do just in the pandemic, but what you do before the pandemic and then during the pandemic, and treating them fairly. In terms of our bonus plans, we don't have a profit sharing plan. We have a performance-based plan. So it's based on a number of different things. And the board pivoted really quickly to change a couple of the metrics in that performance-based plan, really around cash burn, around additional things having to do with safety, which really aligned the employees from top to bottom. And by the way, this is the same program for our frontline employees as it is for the CEO in terms of this particular plan. So the metrics are exactly the same, really built around the values of the company. And I think that has really given us a loyal employee base. But at the end of the day, yes, we will, especially in the technology area, holding on to employees is more of a challenge. Pilots, if they want to fly an airplane, there are only fewer places where they can go besides an airline. So I think those are a little easier, but some of our other employees are more at risk. So we're very, very focused on that.
Thank you. How are your boards respectively thinking about this pandemic in terms of how the board addresses these kind of risks from future pandemics? Is this a whole board discussion? Is this being discussed in certain committees? How are your boards thinking about addressing this risk in future?
Well, I would say none of us were talking too much about pandemics prior to when this one hit, but we instituted a lot of the plans from things that we had in place around just business continuity and resiliency. And I would say some of that is within the audit committee, but primarily it's a full board conversation. And I think we will have even more conversations around that, and really after action reviews of, what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to be thinking about going forward, because it may not be a pandemic, but certainly there will be things in the future that really underscore the need for shoring up those business recovery and resiliency plans.
I might add, obviously we've learned a lot. There's a lot to be learned still as we come out of this. And so the institution will have that inherent knowledge and education. The board will have it on what to do, what worked, what didn't work. We continue to assess those things. But I think the mainstay, and fortunately for us, I mentioned it earlier, we went through this asset sales that gave us a great deal of liquidity. And so as we think about the future, and whether it's another pandemic, God forbid, or some other substantive tragedy, and we've been through our share of those, 9/11, et cetera, Great Recession. Fortress balance sheet, without a doubt, is what keeps all things going. And so, as a CEO, I've got a lot of ideas for the future. I'm trying to get through a pandemic and then, go to the next place. But making sure we have the liquidity to survive anything, maybe not at this scale. This has been pretty draconian. If you think about where we were going, as our start to 2020 was also off to a gangbuster, and where this is probably going to end up, it's going to probably cost this company over $5 billion in cash. And the good news is we have it. But as we think about that kind of impact on the future, ensuring that we always have something to rely on to make sure we don't put the company in jeopardy I think is the critical, most important thing to focus on.
Thank you. We have a three-part question for you, Bill. I'll read it quickly.
Early in the morning now.
Try and remember all three parts. As CEO, what is the question that worries you most? 2, what will normal look like for MGM Resorts in the sense of being able to provide the pre-crisis guest experience in spas, casinos, restaurants? And 3, do you believe the steps you're taking today prepares you for a future health crisis?
Look, I guess the thing that keeps me up at night is, you hear about additional viruses coming and will this vaccine work? And the other thing that is interesting to me is, and I'm sure you've all heard these same statistics I have no real insight into this, but the quantum of medical workers, the percentage of them who are not taking the vaccine, I find interesting. And so I do hope as a society, I hope as an industry, we get behind this initiative, we get people vaccinated, and that they feel ultimately safe. And yeah, herd mentality at some point will take over, but that might take longer than at least I know Patty or I'd be comfortable with, and I know our board would be comfortable with. So that's one of the things that I think I concern myself with the most. I do believe, we may go through some ebbs and flows, and so being prepared for that, making sure that we're communicating effectively to our employees so that we don't disappoint. Ultimately, our guests is important. To me, normal, the day I can host a concert or a sporting event at scale, it like approaches 10,000 plus people, is normal, because it will mean a lot has changed. It will mean the government has lifted its sanctions. It will mean the environment feels safe and people want to come back. That'll be the first sign of normalcy. The second one will be when that large group we mentioned, corporate or otherwise, comes to Las Vegas at scale. Not just that they're going to be here in name, but they're going to be here in scale. I think that will be the most important thing. And I did forget the third question.
The third question was, do you believe the steps that you're taking today will prepare you well for a future health crisis?
Yeah, look, again, I think there's a lot of learning. I think the answer is absolutely yes. God forbid. I think educating our employees, taking care of our employees, they have been beyond resilient through all of this. The organization's been beyond resilient. We've opened, we've closed. I've never closed a property in 40 years. And the idea of having to close all of them, what we've learned through all of that was pretty interesting. But the institution now has that knowledge. We've opened and closed in several jurisdictions a couple of times. In the middle of it all, we had a hurricane in Biloxi, Mississippi that closed us down. So the resiliency of our employees gives us a great deal of confidence. The education we've gotten out of this teaches us a great deal. I doubt it will come the exact same fashion. God forbid it comes at all, at least during my tenure. But I think we're ready for it. I know we would be ready for it. And we could we acted very quickly in retrospect, but I think in some instances we could act even quicker, get protocols in play, get things up, get communications out to employees and customers even sooner. I think that's some of the takings and the learnings.
Do you have any comments to add, Patty?
No, I think Bill did a nice job of addressing all three of those questions.
That sort of brings up another topic. Even with vaccine availability, how are we going to handle employees or vendors or people who just don't want to get it? Because you both have critical supply chains. How are we going to handle that to get comfortable?
Well, I think it's one of the things that lots of organizations are talking about, specifically in the aviation industry. I know we have one airline that has said that it's going to be mandatory for their employees to get the vaccine. The rest of us have not made that mandatory at this point. I think we'll do it with education around the vaccine. And I do think that as more and more people get the vaccine, those people who are hesitant, unless they're just anti-vaxxers, but those people who are hesitant from a safety perspective of the vaccine will be more encouraged to get it. In addition to Alaska and Park, I also sit on the board of a hospital here in the Seattle area. And Bill mentioned, I think that, hard to believe that healthcare workers don't want to take the vaccine. We've seen really good response in that area. And I do think that just in my own personal sphere, and family sphere. A month ago, there were a number of people who said, I'm not getting that vaccine. And they've changed their mind now as they've seen that rollout of the vaccine. That will take some time to do it, but we are hopeful that we don't have to go to a mandatory, but we'll see as this further plays out. I also think that from a government perspective, that they will play potentially a part in this in terms of whether or not what restrictions they will put on travel of people who don't have the vaccine. So yet to come, but those are some of the early thoughts.
And again, maybe Richard echoed some of the same sentiments. We've had extensive conversations, principally with our largest union here, about mandating vaccines. Unbelievably, to some degree, they're in favor of that. Now, having said that, for religious, other medical, there'd be a host of exceptions that would prevent that action for all. But the general notion is we're going to push hard, whether it's a mandate in the legal sense, meaning you come to work or you cannot. We yet to determine that. But the sentiment is it's in the industry's best and the individual's hopefully best effort to push this out and push it hard. I think it'll be another 45 days or so before we get enough vaccines to really have that issue at stake. But as this thing continues to mature, and it will, we're going to push hard. We believe in it. We think it's important. We think it provides the kind of public safety that people want to hear about. And so, we've had testing here since day one for our employees. It is interesting. It's free. It's available. How many do and don't take it? It goes both ways. In terms of our population base and what type of workers want that kind of daily testing or not. And so the vaccines would be the same thing, but we're going to push hard.
Rose, I don't mean to leave you out of the conversation. You're an important part.
Well, that's kind of you to say. Well, I have found this exchange to be, very helpful. As Bill mentioned, I have fellow directors on this call, and I can tell you that the challenge has been significant. The ability to bring together resources, to think innovatively, to find a way to meld both the emotional with the professional requirements over the last few months been a difficult hurdle. But everything comes down to preparation, leadership, and execution. And I think what you've heard from both Patty and Bill is that we're very fortunate to have folks who understand the importance of leaning into that leadership. As a director, I think we all feel an additional obligation in this environment to be extremely engaged and to maybe level up our engagement as we try to move toward recovery. So I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in, but I think our presenters have provided us with a really open and transparent look into what these two industries are dealing with.
So there was another question here too about, Bill, you mentioned that you came into your role in the first 2 weeks of this crisis. And there's a question here saying that the CEO of Alaska Airlines has announced that he's leaving. So that brings into focus board succession planning, the process for CEOs and two large companies. Has that been a challenge or was the process extremely robust in terms of being able to move through that process in the midst of this crisis?
Well, maybe I'll talk about the Alaska experience. At Alaska, we have been looking at CEO succession, in particular, Brad, our current CEO, his succession for the last 3 or so years, planning for this to happen. So looking at people who would take his place when he announced his retirement or his plans to the board some time ago. So we've had a very orderly process. I would say that when the pandemic hit, it caused a number of board members to say, whoa, is this a good time to have a CEO succession take place? And Brad was very open with the board that he would do what was in the best interest of Alaska and didn't want to leave the CEO position in a time of great uncertainty. So we probably delayed the actual announcement by a handful of months. It wasn't any longer than that. Brad's successor at the CEO level is someone who's been at Alaska for probably 15 years, a very well-known quantity to the board as well as to employees. But it was something that gave us some pause, not only because of just that transition, but we also didn't want the employee base to think that, oh, we're really in trouble because Brad is stepping down as the CEO. Right. In fact, Brad, while he will effective in March, relinquish the CEO responsibilities, he will be staying on as the executive chair of the board. So we think we have the best of both worlds in our new CEO, as well as continuing to have Brad's leadership more at the board level than at the employee level. And I will have to say that it's been really very, very well received by the employee base, as well as by the community, because Alaska is very, very involved in the community, and Brad has been that face. But Ben certainly is well prepared to take that over. So long way of saying having a process in place, as we all know as directors, is one of the most important things that we do. And I think it served us well in this pandemic to have that.
Well, thank you very much. Sadly, we've run out of time, and thank you, Rose. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Bill. This has been a great program, and now I'd like to turn over to Larry Taylor to close us out.
Thanks, Richard. Great program, very interesting. I was really excited to hear about the quality of the air on the airplane. I'm still flying, so that's good news to hear from you, Patty. So thank you, Patty and Bill and Rose, for the program, the insights, sharing your knowledge with us. Real quick, we've gone through a bit of a succession planning for our chapter as well. Richard Monroe is the president-elect. Effective July 1st, he will become the president of the chapter, the CEO of the chapter. I've been the CEO for the last 4 years. I want to give a shout out to Dave Rosenblum, who's on the call here. He's been our chair for the past 4 years. I also saw Donna Vaughn from National is here. Hi, Donna, good to see you. I wanted to make sure that you all are aware that we have a survey that you're going to receive in your inbox after the program. Please fill it out. It gives us some significant feedback so that we can improve the quality of our programs, which I think are already pretty good. Our next program is going to be February 9th on disruptive risk. We're actually looking at a Blue Ribbon Commission report that was put out a couple of years ago. So we're looking back at that, see what's changed during the pandemic. And I think Richard talked at the beginning about a few of us staying on for some networking. You know, if we were still in person, we would have a separate room set aside for people to stay over for 15, 20 minutes to talk about the program and other issues. So we do this digitally now. So if you could, we're going to go out into breakout rooms in a couple of minutes. And if you could stay 15, 20 minutes for further networking, we would appreciate that. So with that, I want everybody to have a great day. It's exactly 9 o'clock. So I guess we timed it well.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Patty.